Good afternoon, change now. Just want to check, can you hear me okay? Yeah, in the back, it's all good? Right, okay, just bear with me here. In 1970, a scientist called George Ainsley conducted an experiment. What George Ainsley said is, on the one hand, I can give you $50 right now, or I can give you $100. Now here's the catch. If you take the $100, you're going to have to wait for 6 months. So what do you think most people did? Put your hands up if you feel that they selected $100. Nobody. Put your hands up if you think they selected a $50. Okay, right, that is called hyperbolic discounting. Or another word for this is called immediacy bias. And this is what we're here to talk about now, is thinking long-term in a short-term world. In a world that wants gratification today. It wants instant profits, instant benefits. We want 24/7, whether it be our news or our pizza or whatever it is. But sustainability, the whole agenda, is complex. It's full of wicked and complex problems which could not be fixed in an instant. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here. My name is John McAlalisi. I'm a partner at KPMG. I'm one of the chairs. I'm a vice chair for KPMG in the UK, and I'm also the global head of ESG. We've got an amazing panel of speakers to touch on this whole concept of immediacy bias and how we embed sustainability into long-term thinking about adaptation, resilience, thinking about not only matters concerning the environment and nature and biodiversity, but also social factors. So here's the start. Now, I'm absolutely delighted. Joining us fresh from Washington. I think she's just flown in from Washington. We have Laurence Tubana coming in. I'd like to welcome her to the stage. I'm going to hear a little bit about what she's been doing in Washington, but Laurence, please come on in and come and join me. Welcome. So, Laurence, you're currently the CEO of European Climate Foundation, but you've got a very long career, and I just touched on one. Prior, you were France's climate change ambassador and special representative for COP21. So no doubt you feel like you're coming home, but you've just come back from the US. Yes. What were you doing in the US?
Well, there was a spring meetings in DC. In a particular, of course, you imagine a very tense atmosphere where you feel it was palpable, you feel the fear of people to talk about climate change. And you know, it's 10 years after Paris. For me, this year is particularly special. Really, Paris Agreement is my baby, so I want to protect it. And there you see the pressure, the idea that this is over. We should not look at climate change. It's a woke issue. Like, for example, the Secretary of Finance, Cette, said to IMF and World Bank meetings. So this atmosphere of fear on one side, where you see people that have climate change on their job title in the World Bank make it disappear. And at the same time, there was many meetings on the side to prepare for the reaction, for the fight back. So I came with a lot of, yes, it's difficult, but I think the fighting monk is coming back, which is absolutely essential. And then we talk about key transformation of the global economy we should bring without US. So what we can do without US in the new global order we have to build.
So, I mean, one thing, and we just had a brief chat, and I referenced this immediacy bias, and you said something to me in the backstage which I thought was brilliant about this cognitive bias and this cognitive dissonance, and the fact that we all need to lean into a future that we can move towards. Maybe, would you like to share some of what you said on that?
Yes, really. I'm really convinced that, in particular, and the responsibility is on our side as well, that in its culture battle, if I may call it like this, we have missed the point to present a future. And you know, our environment bubble, our climate bubble is talking about the future is wind turbines, solar panels, bikes. You don't construct a future without these ideas, in these images. And on the other side now, we see from the far right, utopia for them, which is a dystopia for us. A very concentrated power system, a way to exploit a maximum nature, and then leave Earth for Mars or the Moon or whoever. You know, there is a very funny podcast by a brilliant American academic, Jill Lepore, and she's reading what Elon Musk read as a book that inspired him. And she said he always misreads it, basically science fiction. And you know, his view of the future is a very dark view. Only on the bad side, the dark nights, the concentration of power and people, only the more intelligent getting access. And this is the utopia they are proposing, but it is something of the future. And on our side, so for us it's the dystopia, but we don't offer an alternative. People need a vision of the future to combat this immediate bias.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know where to look for, you don't have a target, you don't have a view, you don't have a hope. And we need that. Young people, old people, everybody need a vision of the future. And that's where I think we have to build it now, build our imagination, imaginary, that is not technical, but social, cultural, and full of life. And we have to build and defend our utopia now.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Isn't that wonderful? That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So, Laurence, and again, I can't say how delighted I am that you're here because you're very busy, you've just flown in. What are your priorities right now?
So, I am a European anyway, even if, of course, my main involvement personal has been always on international scene. And I think we have to save Europe. Europe cannot fail now. It's very important to understand that we cannot abandon the Green Deal. We cannot abandon the extraordinary result we had. Europe is the only one continent that has really reduced its emission over time in a very significant way. And now we see somehow, by manipulation of information, a sort of leading that we should backtrack. We should not. So my first immediate, more important task for the moment is Europe is not the domino that can fall. We can allow for that. So we have to defend Europe, and not only at the green growth or Green Deal project, but as a societal and a democratic project. You know, I cannot speak about climate change anymore without talking about defending democracy. It's about of law. It's about citizen engagement. It's about everyone being accountable and responsible, including the companies, including the government. I do see a lot of manipulation of information today to say, no, the public doesn't want, people are aggressive against climate policy. That's not true. That's information manipulation. You know, it's easy to, with algorithms, to show that people are not happy with this or that. So that's why I think we need honesty and clarity and responsibility for leaders. But, you know, I don't think that the fire will come from them. The fire will come from the people. I'm totally convinced of that. So, you know, where is the fire? Where we can just accelerate it. And so that's my, of course, concern. Now, of course, we have a big, very concrete task, really to have this funding of this enormous investment of the transformation to happen. It's good that the Germans finally get out of this debt brake problem. But we need to have not only speaking of defense and how we arm, we need to, but we have to prepare the investment for now and the future. And that we have to have a new setting of the global financial system in Europe first, but elsewhere as well. And we are not doing it for the moment enough, by far. I'm worried about the interest rates that still less developing countries are paying. You want to do a project in France or in Germany, what you would pay, maybe 3 or 4% of interest rate if you have to borrow. When you are in Ghana or even in Kenya, you would pay 8% or even 14%. How you can, when you are absolutely crippled with debt, how you can do that? How can you get a future? When you have to choose between funding education, health, and paying the debt service, so the future is not there. So that we have to prolong this horizon. is there is really, you remember maybe the famous phrase of Mark Carney, hopefully the next Prime Minister from Canada, that could be, he has said there is a tragedy of horizons. Developing countries have this strategy now, and we have to break that.
Yeah, and look, you just touched on, really one of the key points is that unlocking of capital, is public capital, is private capital, and we hear a lot about, hedging risk. You talked about currency risk, and this is not just the global south anymore. With the fluctuations we're seeing now, this is all around. Are we doing enough to unlock that capital? And could governments, what more could governments do to provide, a long-term vision that will attract the required investment?
So one, they have to be disciplined, because you cannot change the law every 2 years. Look in France, we have changing the support almost every year or every 2 years minimum, so not good. And then you see, of course, authoritarian regime like China, centralized, who have a long-term vision, and they do better from some point of view. So we need that, a discipline, a compact between any government, that this long-term vision will be respected. And that's why it's important to have the institutions that ensure that. We don't have them totally now. Second, I think the governments themselves, they don't factor in the risks. That's why I am really lobbying these days for insurance companies to step up. Look, more than 300 billion of losses every year since 9 years. And of course, most of it is not insured. The reinsurers now are saying we cannot insure anymore this risk. You cannot insure in California your house against fires. It's no more. Or in Florida because of the floods. And how you imagine a global economy without insurance? That doesn't exist. You have to. So they have now to speak up, show their data, and say, look, government, central banks, commercial banks, companies are trying to ignore the risk when the risk is not for tomorrow, is today. Probably India last year lost about 2% of their GDP because of the extreme events. And of course, this India, big country, big capacity relatively. And look of the small islands. They are waiting for the next wave of typhoons or hurricanes, and that will be not 2% GDP loss, it will be 80% GDP loss. So we can't stay like this. So risk is a major factor, and for companies. What struck me in the discussion we had recently on EU regulation and people, I was commenting some colleagues, I started the year very badly, I can say. I was in Davos, and Davos it was, Trump is a genius, EU is really ridiculous and competitive, EU bashing, come on, look at the future. That's not there. Everyone, it was terrible. And then I went to San Francisco, and San Francisco people, of course, were really disappointed, terrified. And then I landed in Munich to listen to Mr. G.D. Vance's address. So, you see, it's easy to manipulate the information to say, look, you are dead, you are over. But really, when you look at the reality of where the resources, the social contract is still there, the citizen capacity is still there, is not with them, is with us. And so I think the main element is really to stand up now. We have to say stop. We will not get there. And we will fight. And we can, for moral grounds, economic grounds, just intelligence and science, and we have to stand up. I would say, before dying, Pope Francisco said something very, very, very important. He said, we should not let fear arrive. And that, I think, my message.
Who doesn't agree with that, right? Fantastic. Fantastic. I'm really pleased that you touched on insurance. I spoke at an event in California before the last wildfires. 3 million homes immediately at risk, just in that one state, 34.5 million across the whole of the US. And quite often, we can see this as a single sector issue. It's an issue for the insurance sector. But maybe if you can expand a little bit more, because it is broader. You mentioned you cannot do business, you cannot buy a home, you cannot sell a home. What should people here, these are business leaders, these are entrepreneurs, how might this be impacting on them, and what do they need to do? What do they need to be demanding of their insurance providers?
I'm maybe not diplomatic there. We have to have a frank conversation. I was really struck by this discussion about simplification in EU. It was not an honest conversation, frankly. I talked with number 2 of Bank of America, for example, complaining that they spend 1/3 of their time filling the formulas for EU regulation. Come on, that's not true. Anyways, there are many people outside in consultancies that do that for them. Huh? So that's not the point. I think the point is the honest conversation and sharing the view, the vision of the risks that the business know, but they don't want to be attached to that because they want to have their own flexibility. But if everyone looks for individual flexibility and liberty, we are really having the prisoner dilemma classical thing. And so that's why I think it's a moment to have an honest conversation. We need regulation. I've been working on sectoral voluntary agreements many times. Doesn't deliver anything. You just do what you plan to do. So we need forcing mechanism and honest and transparent conversation between business, government, and we need, and that through that, as you mentioned, the financial backbone is the essential one. It's an essential one. And I've been talking to many central bankers recently, Christine Lagarde, the Bundesbank president, many others. And they say the same. We need the sharing of the risk because at the end of the day, the central bankers will ensure the whole financial stability until the end, that the commercial banks will lend to people that they can trust that they will not be affected by climate risk, whether transition or whether climate events. And this was quite vivid 5 years ago, and now, because of the fossil fuel capacity to blur, to speak about security is about us, is not about nothing else, then people lose this sense of the risk. And we are at risk of the global economy.
Yeah.
We are not at risk of, and that is, the perception of the government is not there. That's why, yes, they have a lot to do, but they have to understand.
Yeah.
And they lost the point, in my view, in most of the cases.
Okay, so you've seen that loss of that focus, but we do have a point in time of focus coming in COP30, don't we? We started this, and I could keep speaking to Laurence all day, but unfortunately we've only got the last few minutes. But maybe last question for myself: when we think about the legacy of Paris to where we got to today, and we're looking ahead to COP30, what are your hopes? What do we need to do? What do we need to achieve? What are you looking forward to?
So once, even if there is a lot of critics, which of course are organized, Paris Agreement has delivered, but remember, we could not agree on it early enough. It's very long to reorient the global economy. But it has delivered, and electric vehicles, batteries, wind turbines, solar, whatever, 90% cost reduction from 2015 and 2010. So that works. Companies, their plans, you name it, a lot. It has been a huge transformer. But now we have to go further. We have to include the one who are on, and when I built the Paris system, I said we have the government's national sovereignty, we have the agreements, and we have the non-state actors and the finance. And the non-state actors has now to take responsibility. But we know an accountability system, we know that really they contribute really, every business, every city, every region to the global goal, and they are accountable of that. It's not there for the system, but I see COP30 can unleash that. It's the implementation of Paris fully, what we have to deliver at COP30. At the moment where, sometimes, of course, we can be anxious and depressed, but look, we are, all of us, whatever age we are, and I'm not a young person. I've been there for 30 years working for climate. But it's an extraordinary moment. we are living through history. We have living when a particular order is disassembled, will dry off, will be renovated, will be destroyed, and we have to build a new one, the new philosophy, the new vision. So it's an exciting moment, and COP30, in my view, could be the launch of that process.
This is an extraordinary moment. It's a tough moment, but we all have an opportunity to lean into building that new vision. I just want to thank you for all that you have done in leaning into building and driving the vision to date, and all that you will do in the future. I know it'd be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce. Doesn't time fly when you're having fun? There's a lot there, so we're going to go straight on to our next discussion. I'll move down, so we have a panel. We've got 3 speakers coming up now. Francesco Veloso, Dean of INSEAD, Fabrice Barthélemy, CEO of Target, and Laurence Pezes, who's the CSO of BNP Paribas. Please come in and join me as we continue our discussion. Good to see you. Good to see you, Lawrence. Have a seat. How is everyone? You all okay?
Yeah?
Yeah? And we'll do a quick mic check. Again, we can hear everybody at the back. We're all good? You can hear us?
Yeah?
Yeah?
Guess so. Good.
Wave your hands at the back. I've got a thumbs up. Thank you, sir. There
1,
you go.
2,
2
3.
thumbs up even. Right. Look, let's just jump straight into this. Maybe if I start, Laurence, I will start with yourself. Sorry, Fabrice, sorry, I'll start with yourself. When we had a brief chat, and we talked about the fact that that you guys at Target, and maybe you introduced a little bit of what you do in Target, you were really fast out the blocks with your CSRD reporting, a lot of work, a lot of data, perhaps too much data that you went through, but when we're thinking long term, what insights were you able to pull from that data, and how has that enabled you to drive forwards your long-term planning?
Well, first, John, when we started the journey towards circular economy, we didn't know exactly where our carbon footprint was. And really that data, in CSRD there is too much data, but we had to work with data to understand where our carbon footprint was. And we understood it was, of course, like many manufacturing companies, it is scope 3 that makes about 85% of our carbon footprint. And therefore, we directed our efforts into what could reduce that carbon footprint, and this is using better raw materials, using more recycled raw materials, and of course, taking care of what happens to our products after their end of life. And so with that data, we are able to measure what we do and our results. We are a manufacturing company. We like KPIs. And we know that by giving the right KPIs to the teams, we get results. So we are very proud, for example, to have doubled our share of recycled materials over the last few years from 10 to 20%. It's only a step, but it's very important. There's another example I want to give about data in long-term decision is, like any manufacturing companies, we make everyday decisions for the long run. When you build a factory, when you invest in a new line, it's not for 1 or 2 years. It's for at least decades. And therefore, we have included in the way we look at investments, a shadow carbon tax. And we priced carbon emissions not at 40, 50 euros per ton, but 250 euros per ton, which is at least what the cost will be in a few years. And therefore, we are able to make better decisions, actually, when we try to offset or to compare location of plants, energy mix of plant location and countries, and to take into account the future cost of greenhouse gas emissions in the way we look at the investments. These are 2 examples of data I wanted to share with you.
Yeah, it's so fascinating in this truth world, when we're struggling with facts, you're anchoring to data, to facts, to actually drive your long-term planning, which is wonderful, fantastic. But if I move on from data and facts, I'm going to go to maybe a bold vision. Laurence, a bold vision, a bold statement, choosing to align your credit portfolio to a 2 degrees world, you know, saying that a while ago now, working towards that, I mean, that took some courage. Maybe you could just talk about that decision, right? And how did you get buy-in and support for that decision?
Yes, you're right. When we took the decision to align our credit portfolio with a net zero scenario by 2050, it was considered kind of a bold decision. But we did it based on several convictions. First, well, we decided to set intermediary targets, of course, 2030 targets, which, believe me, in the financial world is already very long-term thinking. But we support clients, especially in the industrial sector, that have a very long time horizon. They're invested for 10, 15 years and more in order to decarbonize their business model. So they have a rather clear view of the reduction trend of their CO2 emissions. So we basically set our targets based on the forecast of our clients, which makes sense, of course, from a commercial standpoint. But we also did it because as the leading bank of the EU zone, we are firmly convinced of the need for Europe to decarbonize itself for competitive reasons, for sovereignty, for job creations, innovations, industrial filière, you name it. And we consider, as we have 2/3 of our activities in the EU, that it's our job to support this transformative change. It's also motivated by risk management reason. We all know that the transformation we are living is a competition. There will be winners, there will be losers, and better to know as early as possible which clients we're going to support. And last but not least, it answers the expectations of some of our stakeholders, such as, for example, institutional shareholders in the EU, who also have a risk management approach, representative of the civil society, of course, and the most important, our staff, who are very proud of belonging to a bank leading the transition. That's basically the rationale for us to take what seemed at 2022 to be a little bit strange.
That's wonderful. So you've got a bold decision, but interim targets, and the desire or a strong commitment to drive decarbonisation. But if I may, Francesco, I'll come to you. If we challenge ourselves a little bit, that we're not quite there. Global stocktake from COP28 told us that we know we're not on track for 1.5 degrees. Probably the most optimistic view would put us at maybe 2.9, 3.1 or so. So there's a gap. And quite often I refer to this gap as being closed by innovation, an innovation gap. So maybe, you know, just to hear from yourself and your role at INSEAD, what are some of the things that can be done to unlock innovation to help to close that gap and drive decarbonisation, as we just heard from Laurence?
Thank you. I think there are, obviously this is a big challenge, and so there are multiple elements that can contribute into it. I'd like to highlight two or three of them. One is to really challenge the business model. I mean, one of the things that often happens is that we get stuck in how to optimize what we do. So as you said, if you're thinking about that innovation gap, you need to think about, can I rethink the way that I do business in a particular area and really enter in that space in a different way? And we have increasing number of examples of entrepreneurial initiatives and firms that have gone through that. And since this is the year of COP30 in Brazil, I mean, we work with a couple of firms. One very interesting is, for example, Sigma Lithium in Brazil. Lithium extraction is often thinking of something that's polluting. Well, they've created because they've challenged the business model, they've created an entire company that is actually net positive on all dimensions, not only on energy, but also in waste and a variety of things. Because, I mean, it took them a long time. They almost went bankrupt 3 times because they have to rethink the business model. But now they're out there. They're listed in the NASDAQ, and they're an amazing example of how if you push your business model to a different level, you can really do things in a different way. But that also connects to what we think is our role as a school, because we have different roles. One is certainly to look at these and to help disseminate, because as you were saying, if there is that gap, people need to understand what are the opportunities, what are others doing. And that's what we can do through the way that we educate the next generation of leaders, but also through our intervention in terms of executive education. We do a lot with existing firms, with executives, to help them better understand what they can do to challenge those assumptions, think differently, and make a change. And of course, we're very proud of really doing that with our students. We really adjusted the way that we think and that we prepare them to be able to, be better leaders in this, to close that gap that you're talking about. And this is something that it involved rethinking the entire curriculum of the MBA, for example, to have sustainability across the core. We changed our capstone project to make sure that it really focused on sustainability. So these are some of the things that we can do on understanding, disseminating, and then training and educating the next generation of leaders.
I don't know what you guys all think, but when I just heard from Francesco, who nearly got made bankrupt 3 times, I was like this. And there's a lot of entrepreneurs here, because that takes courage, right? It does take courage, and I know that a lot of people will be thinking that and feeling that. But Laurence, maybe back to you yourself. It takes courage, but it also takes capital. How do we unlock capital for exactly the sorts of scenarios and these challenging initiatives that we've just heard now from Francisco?
So maybe I would start to convey a positive note. The world hasn't come on pause because of what's happening in the US, and we have a massive pipeline of low carbon projects coming from all the regions of the world: Southeast Asia, Middle East, Europe, Latin America, etc. And there are lots of renewable energy projects, of course, green hydrogen, energy efficiency, energy storage, which is very encouraging. But still, I think that we could do better. And in some areas, there are still some bottlenecks that we could collectively solve. For example, in the transportation sector or heavy industry sectors, I think that some signals from policymakers would help the industrial companies unlock investments, because they need clear visibility and stability. Also, Laurence Tubiana was insisting on the need for us to support emerging countries in their decarbonization. So, of course, we finance renewable projects, but they will have to manage the intermittence. And if we want us out of coal, they will need gas, of course, but also nuclear will be part of the equation, as we need all the levers at our disposition. And so far, the multilateral development banks, the guys, the big development banks that we need on our side to finance projects, long-time projects in those considered risky countries, still don't want to support nuclear projects. So I think it's something which could be improved. And also, an important thing is to make the transition affordable, and affordable for everybody. And I have a great example in mind, in the agriculture sector, with one of our clients, McCain, the big potato firm. McCain took also a bold commitment to have 100% of their potatoes coming from regenerative agriculture by 2030. So they are asking all their supply chain, so the farmers, to move from industrial agriculture to regenerative. So it requires investment, it requires capacity building. The yields will decrease during the period of transition. So the farmers need financial support. And that's where we come with low interest rates to help them on their transition journey. So I think this is also something important to have in mind, making the transition just and affordable for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant example of an institution such as your own, a bank, recognizing that it will take time. This isn't coming back to the immediacy bias, something that can be solved quickly, and also partnering and journeying with your client over time, which is fantastic. So we hear about bold, challenging business models, recognizing that we need finance. Banks such as your own leaning into that, but maybe I'm going to come back to you, Fabrice. There is a whole piece around positioning the value case for this, and just a little bit of context so that you're all aware. We surveyed with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development CSOs from all around the world. This data is just 3 weeks ago, very recent data, and one of the key areas that they really struggled with is how do I position the business case, the value case for what I want to do from a sustainability perspective. Do you have any insights or any examples of things that you can share on how you've managed to do that within your institution?
Yes, for sure. And we have different stakeholders.
Yeah.
A very important stakeholder is actually who your shareholders are. In the case of Target, we have a family who is controlling Target, and they have that long-term view. So it's very easy for them, and they think also in terms of risk management. Their own wealth is tied to the long-term sustainability of Target, and therefore they really support that long-term view and investment in sustainability. The other group of stakeholders that is relatively easy, I would say also, is internal. Our 12,000 employees worldwide, I think they are proud to work for a company for which sustainability is one of the key strategic pillars. We've done a lot of efforts actually to make possible that all of those 12,000 employees feel and act as ambassadors actually for our sustainability strategy. All that is pretty much easy. But at the end of the day, we're not a charity. We have customers, and these customers are not a charity. So when we sell carpet to BNP Paribas or to KPMG, we sell carpet to you. You might not know it, but we...
Very good carpet.
Very good carpet.
Yeah.
We have to give you a value case, and you want the best value for your money. And what I see personally is that the world is changing. 10 years ago, when I was meeting customers in the corporate world, I was always bringing on the table, forcing the discussion on the carbon footprint of our products, the recyclability, the circular economy, the fact that we were taking back all products. And people were listening to me politely. Now, when we talk to large customers and corporates, very often in their projects, they have someone dedicated to the environmental performance of the project and actually requesting us to come up with proof of our performance, proof of what we are saying, and that I see as a very positive movement. So there is a different proposition to each type of stakeholders, but for each of them, I think we have the answer. And at the end, it needs to make sense financially and economically. So if I'm telling you that the carpet you are buying from us will be recycled at the end of its life, it will allow you to improve your own carbon footprint and also improving overall the cost of your project.
I think that's a wonderful story, and we often talk about the need to thread the needle. So if you imagine when you threaded a needle, it's tough, right? It's difficult to get to the central point whereby it is sustainable, but you're considering all of the potential financial impacts, the commercial benefits over the long term. So Francesco, I'm going to come back to you, because when we reflect on all of these conversations, bold vision, breaking the interim goals down, courageous business models, needing the financing, needing to convince internal stakeholders. Again, coming back to your role at INSEAD, how does this feed into how you're preparing future leaders to lean into this agenda? And also when we look at people or existing leaders, what guidance or what advice would you give them based on your programs that you're delivering internally?
I mean, we're an intellectually led institution, and this is important because one of the things that we're doing, and I mentioned before, looking at business cases and business models, is to have our faculty out there looking at what's going on and really, putting a really rigorous filter through that to understand what's working, what's not working, what needs to be done differently, what needs to move. And so that's quite important because we talk about all the great things that are happening, but there's a lot of, we also live in a post-truth world where many things are claimed that are may not be necessarily happening. And so having a grounded view about what's happening or not happening, what has an impact, does not have an impact, is quite important. And this is something that we take very serious in terms of our role, to do it in a way that's really data-driven and with the right mindset. So it starts there, and it starts with that intellectual commitment, and then bringing that to the classroom. And also doing that in a very interactive way. For example, about 6-7 years ago, we created an initiative called the Sustainable Business Initiative, which is effectively a collaborative of about 10 companies working together from different sectors to share and learn from the others. And we use that as a basis, for example, for many of our case studies development that we then bring to the students and that we bring to our executives. And so this interaction between what you do with the companies, learning from that, get it grounded, then bringing it back to the classroom and helping to disseminate is a very important part of what we do. And it's very important at all levels. And what I mean at all levels, and we feel that very significantly. I mean, if I start with my more junior students, which is the masters in management that typically are 22, 23-year-olds, I hardly have to convince anybody at that generation that sustainability is important, that the world is not heading where it needs to be, that there's a gap. I mean, it's more the other way around. They're sometimes coming back to, you're doing a lot, but you need even to do more of it. Then, I mean, if you think about the MBA, and particularly, we have a very global MBA, where say everybody is a minority, we have people from all over the world. And, this is exposed differently and felt differently. So, intersecting the knowledge that we have with this very different reality is extremely interesting from learning, but also from thinking differently about some of the solutions. You were talking also about the stakeholders and the different stakeholders. When you put all these people together and force them to think to some of these sustainability challenges, it really brings different perspectives, because if you're coming from India or Pakistan, it's a very different thing than if you're here in Europe or North America or Brazil, and this is a very important part. The final bit is even all the way up. I mean, I was in a session early this morning to talk about boards. I mean, somebody mentioned these, that was quite an interesting statistic. 75% of the boards have 75 plus years old. There's a big gap on understanding. And so helping the more senior, understanding the challenge and understanding their role on this transition is extremely important. And so we like to operate at all levels, including at the most senior level, to help drive that change, because it takes all the levels to be able to move the needle.
I couldn't agree more, And I'm going to come to you for, I know we're nearly out of time, a rapid fire. And this is why events like this are so important. You've got policymakers, CEOs, activists, you've got innovators. So maybe I'll stay with you, Francesco, just maybe 30 seconds. We'll have 30 seconds each on this. What would, considering all we just heard, the one no regret action you would suggest that people take away this? I mean, thinking long term.
When you think about no regrets, because of this volatility, think about the risk factor. Whenever you're doing anything that mitigates, your negative, environmental footprint and also addresses risk, it's a complete no-brainer. So addressing those immediately is something that you should never regret and you should always be doing regardless of.
Work through the risks. Fabrice?
One no regret action: educate, train, communicate relentlessly, because I am a strong believer that, especially in the world we live in now and what is happening in some parts of the world right now, companies and global companies have a role to play in changing the society. So educate, train, and communicate.
Educate, train, communicate. Laurence, bring us home.
For me, it would be put sustainability at the core of your strategy. You know, our current strategic plan is called Growth, Technology, Sustainability. And believe me, I've been in the sustainability space for more than 15 years. It's a total game changer. It opens all doors to embed the topic everywhere in the business development plans of all the activities, in training, in compensation, in innovation. So the topic no longer belongs to a bunch of people, you know, sustainability leaders. It becomes everybody's business, from the banker in the agency around the corner to the board member, the 70-plus guy.
Okay, that's absolutely wonderful. Please join me in giving this panel a massive round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So much content out there. There's so much content in terms of financing, thinking long-term, short-term goals. Thank you for bearing with me. We just have one more guest now for our final discussion. Hopefully, I don't see him. I'm looking, hopefully Jean-Philippe there he is. Right, Jean-Philippe, come on up. Why don't you come on out and join me? Give him a round of applause, please. I'm good. I'm good. How are you? I think you're just over there. Jean-Philippe, why don't you? I love your role. I love your job. Why don't you introduce yourself? So who are you? And what do you do?
Well, thank you, John, for giving me the chance to share a bit of what we do. I'm the CEO of The Future is Neutral. I'm just going to call the company Neutral. It's going to be easier and shorter for everyone. And that company is operating in the automotive space, so cars. And what we do is we provide solutions, circular economy solutions, for the entire automotive industry, for the entire cycle of a vehicle, from the production down to the end-of-life solutions. And we're, I think, the only dedicated company in Europe to circular economy solutions in automotive, serving car manufacturers, insurers, individuals, tier 1 suppliers, basically the entire industry. Just a few numbers. We've been created in October 2022. The company is 500 people. The total sales is roughly 1 billion euros. It's already profitable, because the activities have been launched way before 2022. And we have on the shelf several millions of used parts for automotive players. We have recycled several millions of tons of products. We have 15 clients and 10 partners. So in a nutshell, this is who we are and what we do.
Well, I'm just going to keep. Oh, brilliant! The clock's working again now. It wasn't working before. Well, congratulations, first of all, being already profitable. I mean, I think that deserves a round of applause. Whatever. You know. Well, and the reason why I say that is that I speak to clients a lot. We're in 143 countries, and when you speak about circularity, you know, quite often there's you know, maybe a roll of the eyes, and this is something may happen in 50 years or so, but you've got a company that's profitable today. What's your vision? What's the mission for the future? Where do you want to get to?
So we think that there is a path where circularity in the automotive space can be competitive, where mass adoption is possible. And in order to reach mass adoption, we need to play with the rules of the games in the industry. And because we are part of the recycling world in automotive, we believe that actually recycling more parts and putting more materials on the market is key. So in other words, we believe massification of our activities, scaling up of our activities, reaching more and more customers is absolutely key, so that the competitiveness of the products and services that we put on the market reaches a threshold which is becoming acceptable for our partners and for our customers.
Sorry, if I may, Jean-Philippe, I mean, this is a really, when we talked before, it's a really interesting point. Maybe if you could expand on this, because normally with the conversations I have, we're talking about reducing
right?
consumption, right? We all should use less, we should look at buy less, we should travel less, but you seem to be suggesting something different.
Correct.
Right, so maybe you'd like to expand on that.
I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
You know, so we have a company called the Remakers, which does remanufacturing of engines, gearboxes, turbos, injection systems. And that company remanufactured last year roughly 350,000 parts. Okay. Every part that is coming out of that manufacturing site is 30% cheaper than a virgin part, and has saved between 80 and 90% of electricity and water compared to the original part. So in other words, for every additional part that we put on the market, it's a good news for the consumer, but it's also a good news for the planet and the environment, because it represents savings compared to new ones. And really that's the idea. Our goal at The Future is Neutral is to decrease the amount of virgin resources that the OEMs, the car manufacturers, need to use in order to produce new vehicles. And we are building a network of companies and partnerships so that this happens in a competitive manner, and therefore the mass adoption becomes a key lever to reduce the prices and to generalize our solutions. So in other words, the better for the environment and the better for the consumers.
Honestly, when you mention this, I think this is a brilliant concept, especially when we think about the world in which we're living now. You know, I'm going to say the T words, tariffs. You know, when we think about the impact on tariffs and the deglobalization, and if you bring in supply chains closer to home, but the minerals, the raw materials that you need are outside. If you look to use that, I think it's absolutely brilliant. But surely this is going to be a massive disruptor for business models. So maybe, you know, what are your thoughts around that disruption element?
Look, I was listening to the previous chat, you know, on stage, and I fully understand, and I agree to a certain extent that, you know, disruption in the business models are required. In our case, it's slightly different in the sense that the business models that we operate are quite, I would say, natural and traditional. Let me give you an example. You know, we are designing, manufacturing, and selling parts. Those parts need to be competitive. They need to be excellent parts. They need to be of very high levels of quality. We also provide services. Those services need to be affordable. They need to be made aware that we have those kinds of solutions, right? And so the business models, in other words, the way that the company is generating profits so that we can reinvest those profits into the circularity of our operations is quite traditional, so to speak.
Okay.
The creativity lies in the way that the company is operating on those very traditional business models. And I think that our customers and our clients in the B2B space have potentially a greater challenge in incorporating our solutions in their linear model.
That's excellent. What's been key to your success today?
Look, it's I think the key success factor number one is that the company has been able or is working extremely hard to make sure that we speak different languages, and those are the languages of traditional enterprises and, you know, organizations and governance structures. So in other words, when we invest in our equipment in a factory, we have to convince the CFO that the investment has a rate of return that is bearable for the company that is investing. In the meantime, the Chief Sustainability Officer needs to understand how many tons of CO2 are saved or avoided thanks to our solutions. And in the meantime, the chief procurement officer needs to understand the level of savings that are potentially down the road, and that is going to be, the savings with neutral solutions compared to other solutions. So one of the key success factors is really to deeply understand the concerns of our customers, the concerns of our partners, and speak their language. It's our role to understand their language, not the other way around. Otherwise, there is a glass ceiling that will never break.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I talk about the importance of being bilingual, trilingual, quadlingual, speaking the language of all these areas. So just one thing, I'm really looking forward to this, because I don't quite know what you're going to do. So at school, do you remember at school, we would have show and tell? You know what I mean? So you bring in something and show and tell. And before you do, okay, so Jean-Philippe, he's got something here. Is it safe?
Yes, it's safe.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, because I wasn't sure if I need to move to this chair.
You're
okay.
safe.
So just in describing the strategic imperative or circularity, because it can get quite technical, you've brought something in to show us. So why don't you show us what you got?
Before I'm taking that stuff out of the pocket.
And you said it's safe. So
it's safe, it's safe, it's safe.
Okay, all right, good.
Just before I'm taking it out, the point of this little example is the imperative of being focused as a company on very clear objectives.
Okay.
And the objectives that we're focused on are the sovereignty of Europe in accessing materials that we don't have in our ground, reducing the environmental impact of the activities that people need, such as moving from point A to point B using mobility services and products, and also the competitiveness of our solutions. Okay, so sovereignty, environment, and competitiveness. And I've brought here, this is rhodium. So little show of hands, who knows what rhodium is and why it matters? One, two, three people. Perfect,
wow.
Perfect.
Wow.
So let me give you one or two hints. Rhodium is a precious metal that is used in every combustion engine vehicle that you find here in Europe, and that serves in reducing the emission of NOx in the atmosphere. So it's a precious metal that you find in the exhaust pipe of the vehicles, okay? Do we have rhodium in Europe? No. You find rhodium in Russia, in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, in Canada, but none a single gram of rhodium in Europe, okay? And I've brought here 1 gram of rhodium. Just bear in mind that that metal is worth 2 times the price of gold as we speak. So 1 kilogram of that represents 190,000 euros. Gold is 90,000 euros.
He has
I just
a security
checked before.
guard outside, so he will be safe going
This
home.
is fake rhodium.
You didn't tell me that before.
But basically, in the exhaust pipes, you find 1 gram of rhodium.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's necessary. So just imagine that to get that gram of rhodium, you would need to take from the ground 1 ton of minerals. In Russia, in Zimbabwe, in Canada, in South Africa, but not in Europe, okay? And I'm talking here about the exhaust pipes that are needed here in Europe. So our view at Neutral is to say, well, if we could get the exhaust pipes that are in the old cars in the dismantling sites in Europe, crush the exhaust pipes and then refine the rhodium that's inside, we have a closed loop in Europe with a pure metal that can be reintegrated, not in mirror polishing or any other industries, but in the automotive industry. And by doing that, we save 1 ton of minerals excavated from the ground and then refined in, I don't know how the conditions were for the refinery of that metal, but we believe that that circularity is probably the beginning of the answer. And we do that for rhodium, we do that for palladium, for platinum, for plastics, for steel, for copper, for cobalt, for nickel, for lithium. And that's only a portion of what we're trying to do with the closed loop that you were just mentioning.
And that's amazing because for me, it brings together a number of subjects we heard from before, bold, forward thinking, also, that long-term thinking. But how are you financing this? Because it sounds complex.
It is.
It sounds expensive. It doesn't sound very easy.
No, it's a bit complex, and we rely on a few things to succeed in that aspect. But of course, there is enough room to progress. Okay, but basically, the foundations of all that is, one, we have a shareholder family which is quite supportive. The Future is Neutral is a company of Renault Group and Suez, so an OEM and a waste management company that are combining not only the financing but also the gray cells, the brains that are required to actually solve problems, circular solutions in the automotive world. So that's key. The second foundation of that company is that we are operating with horizontal partnerships. We don't believe necessarily in vertical integration in every step that we do, but we have a number of partners that we work with in order to coordinate each and every step of the transformation of that little metal I've got in the pocket, or metals, plastics, non-ferrous metals, and used parts. So really partnerships and the courage of our shareholders, in putting us on the market and saying, okay guys, serve the market, become big, because being big is actually a good news for the industry and for the environment.
Absolutely, being big, being commercially viable, means that you're generating revenues, generating funding, and you can put that back in. I know we're coming towards the end of our session now, Jean-Philippe, and maybe you've heard this a few times before. Obviously the framing is the context of immediacy bias, thinking about the here, the now, quick results, quick returns, quick responses, but some of these things are complex, so it needs vision, it needs courage, it needs funding, it needs capital. I've asked all the panelists, and I'll ask you the same. When you look at the audience now, what no regret advice would you give to people here and say, well look, these are one or two things that I'd advise you just to move forwards and go for it?
Okay. Well, first of all, it's a humble contribution given, the quite young age of the company, so there is still a lot to learn. But a few things that we have seen have worked quite well is, one, regarding the vision. It is key to have a vision, but it's also very important to put words on that vision and to write that vision down so that it can be shared with the employees, with the partners, with our shareholders, and that there is one very clear target. And so in order to do that, we have written down the 12 pages document that basically summarizes the vision of the Future is Neutral for the entire industry and how we want to operate in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and that's an aspirational way to advance and to be in the action, okay? Point number 2, is we have decided to operate our company with the rules of the game of the industry. We do not want to revolutionize how the industry is operating, but we want to operate the change in our own company in order for us to be successful in that type of setup. And maybe the word of advice on that is, there is a possibility for businesses, for activities, for opportunities to have a room in the circular economy space without having to revolutionize the entire system. But it takes an incredible amount of lucidity, a lot of work, and definitely the engagement of the employees, but that's the beauty of the company. Every day the people who are working at Neutral, the partners and the customers are here, and they know that they are making an impact, a positive impact for every step that they are making. So maybe short evolutions rather than revolutions has been so far what has been the most efficient in our case.
That's absolutely fantastic. And look, what I would say is, in many ways, this whole dialogue, 5 incredible speakers, has been a dialogue of both and. How do we lean into immediacy bias whilst also creating that long-term vision, the future? How do we disrupt businesses, but also seek opportunities to work within the framework of what we have? You know, how do we drive innovation, but also ensure that we secure the capital that we need? Now, this has been fantastic. I found it really interesting. We've had 5 fantastic speakers. This is at the end of our session now. Please join me in thanking Jean-Philippe and indeed all of the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you.